Hello everyone, this is our weekly video about tenses, and today we're talking about the past continuous tense. But before we pass over to the past continuous tense, we need to remember the present continuous tense because they're very much connected. And as you probably noticed in your digest, a lot of the meanings of the past continuous pretty much correspond to other meanings from the present continuous tense. So when we talked about the present continuous tense, we said that it had 4 meanings and an extra note about stative verbs. So the first meaning was an action going on at a given moment, at the moment of speaking. And here we had a typical example about how somebody is calling you on the phone and you pick up the receiver and you say, "Oh, I'm sorry, my father cannot answer the phone, he's taking a shower, or he's having breakfast, or he's working," and so on. Or for example, I'm going to ask you, "What are you doing right now?" And you can probably say, "I'm watching this video," or "I'm breathing," or "I'm sitting in my house or in my flat, and I'm studying, I'm learning something, hopefully." So then the second meaning of the present continuous was about the present period of time, and our typical example was about an alumni meeting where you are standing with a glass of champagne and you're asking people about their life, the projects they have, and they answer that, for example, Jessica is building a house in Ukraine or in Florida or anywhere, or for example, I'm finishing my PhD, or John is buying a flat in New York, or Samantha is getting married, and so on. So then the third meaning of the present continuous was about a negative attitude to typical behavior, and we remembered that we used the words always, constantly, and never there. When you say something about the action which a person always does and you hate it, you don't like it. For example, you say, "My cat is always asking for food at 5 a.m. in the morning." Or you can say, "People are always complaining about a lot of things they shouldn't complain of." Or "You are never washing the dishes, I don't like it at all." Then the fourth meaning was about a planned action in the nearest future, where you know that you have already started preparations for something which is going to happen. For example, right now I'm recording this video on Thursday, and tomorrow is Friday, the 10th of April, so I can say that tomorrow evening I'm watching the Nutcracker from the Bolshoi Theater, and the Bolshoi Theater is broadcasting the Nutcracker tomorrow, and I'm organizing a party with my friend from Chicago, so we are going to watch it together. Then the last meaning, which is not quite a meaning, which is just a note about stative verbs, was that stative verbs change their meaning when they're used in the present continuous. So you say, for example, George and Emily are seeing each other, and seeing does not mean using your eyes to observe, that means they're dating. Or you say, "You are being very polite, what's wrong with you?" And that means that normally the person is very rude and you are surprised by the fact that suddenly this person is being polite. So we remember these 5 meanings, and with these 5 meanings in mind, we are going to move on to the past continuous tense. And here I have a wonderful presentation. I don't have a blackboard in my house, so we are going to use slides. So first of all, some general information about the past continuous is that the past continuous is an analytical tense. It is built up by means of the auxiliary verb to be in the past indefinite form. So we use was or were, I was, we were, you were, because you is always plural. Then you say he was, she was, it was, but they were. And then after that you add the ing form, and all the rules for the ing form are the same as they were for the present continuous. For example, if you take the verb ban, B-A-N, the 3 letters, and you add the ing, you need to double the last consonant n, benning, B-A-N-N-I-N-G. Or here in the slide you have the sentence, "No, I wasn't using Photoshop," and to use the verb to use normally has the mute e at the end of the word, and the ing suffix kicks the mute e out of the word. So if you have a problem with building ing forms, consult the textbook about the present continuous. And now we move on to the first meaning. And the first meaning of the present continuous, of the past continuous, I'm sorry. The first meaning of the past continuous is correspondent to the first meaning of the present continuous, because it's an action going on at a given moment, but in the past. So here on the timeline, you can see that there is a sentence which is a complex sentence. It has one action which is a single action, and this single action is the countdown point for the process at the moment which we indicated. So you normally, I would say always, but I always know that as soon as I say always, somebody is going to find the example which ruins it. So normally you would have two actions in the sentence where you use the past continuous in this meaning. One of them sets the point, and another one is the background for that point. So Morris was taking a shower. It's the background, and the point when we look at the action of Morris taking the shower is when the telephone rang. Or, for instance, my favorite example from a TV show is that the alarm went off in a corner store, and there was a policeman nearby. The policeman was eating his donut, and at that moment the alarm went off. So when the alarm went off, the policeman was eating his donut. Or a completely true story, I was walking down the street when a brick fell from the roof. I survived, but I was very shocked. And actually you can use this sentence for this pattern for your typical example. So I was walking down the street when aliens landed in Bolshevistskaya Street, for instance. Or I was walking down the street when a car hit a street lamp, for instance. So I was walking down the street when my friend called me and I dropped the phone into the puddle and it was ruined by all the water. So this meaning is pretty clear, and it can be used, it is often used in the stories where you have several characters and you need to tell that one character makes single actions and another character is the background situation for that first character. So the second meaning, meaning 2, is an action going on at a period of time in the past. And it's again absolutely correspondent to the meaning of the present continuous. So you can take the same example about an alumni meeting and change it, but you need to tell it as a story. You can say, we were in an alumni meeting in a very beautiful restaurant, and I asked Barbara how she was doing, and Barbara answered that she was building a house in Chicago. Or Jessica answered that she was starting a restaurant in New York. Or James replied that he was getting married. And also you often use this in scientific texts when you observe, when you have the moment of observation and then the trend which was going on at that period. And here I also have an example about our situation. I have a colleague in Chicago, and she normally does research on domestic violence. She is in political science, and she told me recently that this is the period of time when I know that all this virus situation is a really hurtful situation, we hate it, but at the same time it's very interesting from the scientific point of view, because you can observe a lot of things you would always only think about theoretically. So she now collects data about the impact of the pandemic on domestic violence, because it makes sense. People are locked in their houses together, and like being locked in the house with the person you don't really like is a dangerous thing. So it makes sense that the level of domestic violence rises all over the world, and if you are ever subject to the domestic violence, you know that you should consult the authorities. You shouldn't keep it to yourself, because it is growing more and more dangerous. So right now my colleague is researching the impact of the pandemic, but then many years later I'm going to tell about the situation, and then I'm going to use the past continuous. My colleague was researching the impact of the pandemic on domestic violence. So I sent her the link to the interview, for example. Then let's pass over to the third meaning, and the third meaning is related to the correspondent meaning of the present continuous, but it's a little bit different and it's emotional effect. So if you remember, in the present continuous we used to talk about a typical behavior of a person when we hate the behavior, and here we don't. We can be very optimistic and positive about this action. It's just that we're being emotional. And this meaning maybe is the most confusing in this tense, because many people would ask the question, how is it different from the past indefinite general characteristic in the past? And the answer is, the only difference is the emotion. You can use both. You can use the past indefinite. For example, I can describe a teacher of mine for you. I had a very boring teacher at some point at school. He was tall, he wore shirts and jeans, he had a short haircut, he spoke in a very quiet voice so nobody listened to him, and this is just a description of that teacher. But sometimes he was bringing his guitar to class and we were singing the Beatles songs to his guitar, and that was such a fantastic experience. So you see, as soon as I have grown nostalgic about this person from my past, I moved into the past continuous. Let's see it again. For example, I'm talking about a classmate of mine. She was a very interesting girl. She was a goth. So now she's not. She's like a mother of 3 children at this point. So she was a goth, and she had long black hair, and she wore black clothes, and she drew a tear on her face and went to school like that, a very brave person. And that was just a general description, right? And now I'm going to move into being emotional, and I say, I liked her so much. We were talking all night on the roof of our house. She was telling fantastical stories which had never happened, and I knew that, but I loved listening to them. And she was always laughing with that kind of happy laugh that you know that the person is not laughing at you, they're laughing at the situation itself. So as soon as I went emotional, my emotion moved my past indefinite into past continuous description, right? And here in the slide you can see the example from a book where the two girls grow up and they have an aunt. So my aunt was an unorthodox woman. She played the drums in a local band and wore spiky haircuts. Here is just the description of the aunt. But sometimes she was taking us to her garage and we were banging on the metal plates for fun, and she was telling us wild, ridiculous stories. So here, in the second part of this story, the person who narrates the story becomes emotional. So I hope this meaning is very clear. If you describe a person in the past, normally you would use the past indefinite, but you can use the past continuous if you want to show some strong emotion about this description. The fourth meaning is a planned action in the nearest future, again, like in the present continuous, but this time it is viewed from the past. So this meaning is used in the past time context when you have indirect speech, when you say he said, she said, they answered, we stated, we expected. So you need a complex sentence where somebody introduces another statement about the future. So here you say, Tom said that his uncle was arriving on Friday. And at that moment it was Wednesday, for instance, so it was the nearest future for Tom. For us it's still deep past, right? We lived through that year and we forgot it. But from the point of view of the character of Tom, that was a planned action, right? And now another example is from a newspaper article which I have recently seen. The airline announced they were cancelling all the flights to the cities in the war zone. This is about Syria. And then this airline plans to cancel the flights. Right now, right at that moment, the flights were still in action, they were still effective, but they announced that they were canceling the flights in the nearest future, and it was planned, right? So basically this is it. So you have 4 minutes, they're very easy and nice, and you don't need much context to understand them. And then there is two more pages in the textbook which confused a lot of people when I was looking for your digests, right? So it's about how we have like 3 specific situations where we use one conjunction, and I would say relax. It's not really important. The textbook tries to tell you about some typical mistakes of Russian native speakers and some typical, shortages, some typical problems of the native speakers of English. And let's look at 3 problems which the textbook mentioned. So the first is that many native speakers, they don't really see a difference between the past indefinite and the past continuous tenses when they describe sensations like pain, for example, or feeling, or when they describe appearance. For example, if you look here at the slide, everybody could see that Michael was wearing his pajamas. This is an absolutely correct sentence, classical sentence, because everybody could see is the countdown point, точка отсчета, and then at that countdown point, as the background action, Michael was wearing his pajamas in the progress, in the process. But many native speakers would say a simpler sentence just because they are lazy to use the past continuous, and they simplify the sentence. So they say everybody could see that Michael wore his pajamas. The same about Sean complained that his back hurt. By the way, Sean, this is how this name is spelled, right? So I hurt my elbow, I'm sorry, that was a loud sound. So Sean complained that his back hurt, and Sean complained that his back was hurting is basically the same thing for many speakers. Of course, if we're being very grammatically correct, if we are trying to use everything in written speech very correctly, we would make a difference between these 2 sentences, because Sean complained that his back hurt means that his back hurts a lot, right? It's a general condition for his back. But if Sean complained that his back was hurting, that would mean that at the moment when he is complaining, when he complains, his back is hurting. And for us, it may be a difference. Many native speakers are lazy to use the past continuous here. Then the next situation when many native speakers seem to have a problem is that a lot of people dislike a combination. When you say, for example, I was washing the dishes while my husband was walking the dogs, for instance, or while my grandfather was working in the garden. And many native speakers get confused. They don't like the combination of 2 cases of the past continuous together. So while a lot of people are going to use the past continuous in both the parts of the sentence, a lot of people would say just one past continuous in this type of sentence. So you can see the 2 sentences. The queen was staring out of the window while the king was speaking. It's correct. The queen stared out of the window while the king was speaking. It's again absolutely correct. And it doesn't look like there is really much grammar difference here. I met people, native speakers, who would use, who would mark the first variant as correct, and I met other native speakers who would mark the second variant as correct. And it looks like it's a matter of the individual style, right? So, of course, I would say for training purposes, we would try to use the first variant because it gives us much more information about the queen, right? Then the last problem, okay, now we're going to the part which everybody finds difficult, but it's not. And I'm going to show you the conjunction S. So the textbook gives us 3 cases with descriptions, with examples, and it looks like it is something very important, but it's not really a rule. Like, if you're attentive, it's just the same meanings in different combinations, and the only problem is that the conjunction as is polysemantic in Russian when we translate it. We can translate the conjunction as пока, as когда, as как только. And then these three translations are going to result in three different combinations of tenses. So it's not the grammatical problem of tenses, right? It's the problem that the conjunction as does not correspond to any Russian conjunction alone. So this is not a grammatical problem. The textbook just makes it a translation problem, right? So we can have three sentences where I'm going to translate them so you see the difference, and the conjunction as realizes different kind of time reference here. As he drank his tea, I waited. Пока он пил чай, я ждала. And in this case, this is a story in the past. It's not interesting anymore, so it's a period that's a period in the past which is over now, and the speaker does not find it important anymore, right? Пока он пил чай. Then the second sentence, я задала ему вопрос, когда он пил чай, или как раз когда он пил чай, and as a result he swallowed too much tea or something happened, right? So we have the background action where the person is drinking his tea, he was drinking his tea, and I cut into that process. I asked him a question. No problem at all. Then number 3, as he finished his tea, I asked him a question. Как только он допил чай, я задала ему вопрос. So in this case, as is translated as it has the meaning of a conjunction when there is a succession, right? Something happened earlier than the other thing. And as he finished his tea, I asked him a question is just a succession of two single actions in the past. So I would suggest that we don't pay much attention to this rule as a rule, and we just remember that the conjunction as has a lot of translations, and you translate the conjunction based on what kind of tenses you have in the sentence, right? But when you speak in English, you don't need to remember this background combination plus a single action is going to give us the past continuous and the past indefinite. No, it's not necessary. You just remember that the conjunction as can be translated as когда, пока и как только. And maybe something else, but these three cases are these translations. Okay, so this is the end of our conversation about the past continuous tense, and I hope that you are going to make very interesting typical examples for your own examples for that. I would normally, if we had a class, I would normally ask you to play a game of detective where, for example, one of our group mates disappeared, and I'm the detective, and I'm asking you about your alibi yesterday at 7 p.m. So I would ask you, Marina, what were you doing yesterday at 7 p.m.? Or Dan, what were you doing yesterday at 7 p.m.? And you would answer me, right? So, for example, yesterday at 7 p.m. I was chatting on Skype with my colleagues from Moscow, and they're having more problems than we do. So yes, this is it. So thank you for watching the video, and see you in our online workshop about the exercises.